to Jude Neeme-Samson, who is with us here tonight, and you will be speaking to us on The Wisdom Lives in the Light, a Christmas gift, considering aspects of the birth of our universal humanity from the perspective of the temple of the human body and the formative experience of culture we live in. I'll begin the verse, which used to be a different verse for this term, but Jude has brought us a verse he would like us to start with, and it's a verse that was given by Rudolf Steiner. And once I've done the verse, then I will invite you to come forward and speak. Deep down in the human soul lives the Son of the Spirit, certain of victory. Powers of the true heart and mind sense it. In the egotism of our human winter night, of our inner life, sense the new shoot of hope in our heart. Son's spirit victory is what we behold in blessed Christmas light. Symbol of life most sublime in world winter's deepest night.
Thank you, Brigitte. There was a verse given by Rudolf Steiner at Christmas in 1913, just before the war began, the First World War. And so tonight, I would like to take us on a little journey with various aspects in a way for us to enter into the end of Advent, beginning of the summer solstice or the December solstice on the whole earth, and how we might approach some imaginations for Christmas this year. Last year I spoke about the Christmas tree as a way to try and renew the way to bring a certain sense of awe and wonder at the mysteries of the Christmas mystery. And this year I will be talking about the relationship to Jesus born in Bethlehem. So there will be a bridge to not only that, but also on Sunday there will be a kind of another side to it where we will also look to another aspect of Rudolf Steiner's understanding of the understanding of Jesus, in that they were two Jesus children. So tonight we will focus on the Luke Jesus, and on Sunday we will have more of a focus on the work of the Matthew Jesus, so which gives us a doorway to Christmas in summer, because a lot of our Christian traditions are focused on European traditions. So how do we build a content to what we can do? But before I begin, I would like to also start in the way I have in my last lectures here over the last time, to acknowledge the country where we live on, and not just to say we acknowledge the country of the Gadigal and the Wongal people here in Sydney, but also just to give a possibility of an insight about some of that culture. And I've got here on the board our journey for the evening. If I get lost, I will refer to it. But the first thing is things that have been lost and things that have not been lost. And one of the things that I've come to understand is that at this time of the year, people who used to live here in ages gone by, in the Gadigal people, but also further down, further south, would travel up and they would go on migrations. They would actually walk the songlines, they would walk the rivers, they would walk up the Parramatta River, across the bottom of the Blue Mountains, and head down to Shoalhaven for the summer, because that's where the food lines were. And one of the great sadnesses of the people today who live in Sydney is that that pathway is no longer walkable entirely. So instead of being able to walk in deep connection with the energies and the vitality of the land, we drive cars down the freeway to the Shoalhaven. So the walkways have become highways, and that's a certain loss. There's a certain loss of being able to live freely in this deep connection to land. But something that has not been lost in that is that the Indigenous people still have a deep, vital connection to land. That no matter how much concrete and freeways we pour over the land, the law is still within the land. That what was in the stars, or what is in the stars and was reflected in the formation of the earth, is still there. And it can still be accessed. And I'd like to then just recognize that deep connection I experienced myself, because I used to travel a lot to Uluru. And there was at the time a real push for people not to climb the rock. And there was a bit of an outcry amongst the tourism dollars and other people who thought it was great to climb up the rock, saying we should still be able to do that. And they said, well, the real reason, or one of the reasons why we want to close the climb up the rock, is that we feel responsible for every death that takes place on our land. So we still hold every person who's died on that climb. And we don't want to have too many more of those. So we would like to ensure that there's a certain safety around that responsibility, because it's an initiation walk. It's not just a place for photos. It's an initiation walk. So that brings us to Sydney on Sunday evening, where on Bondi Beach, we had a lot of deaths. Sacrificial deaths, we could call them, but certainly slaughter. And it gives us an opportunity to explore what that means for us now around Christmas time, around this time of the solstice in December. And it's not an exposition that I want to give at a political level. But one of the insights that Rudolf Steiner gives to us is that in our times, since about the beginning of the 15th century, we're living in the age of what he calls the consciousness soul. We could call it the age of the industrial revolutions, where the intellect has really claimed the mastery of materialistic monism and empirical proof. And that has closed down, that has veiled a certain instinctual, but also maybe a collective understanding that there is spirit in general. And if that becomes more and more collective, that there is nothing more than a materialistic understanding of how the world works, fear will take over. And that fear will further veil our capacity to touch spirit. Now, the interesting thing about Sunday is that most of the people who died, is something that Rudolf Steiner said is a really important thing. He was speaking during the First War, and he said that a lot of the young people who died during the First War died in the belief in their soul that there was something to die for, the national spirit, that there was actually a connection in their nationalism towards an understanding of the spirit, that there is a spirit that is worth living and dying for. And many of the people who died on Sunday also had that. We're not going to go into faith debates, but the people who died, including the father who held the gun, had a belief and have gone into the spiritual world with an understanding that there is a spirit. And this is really, really important. So let's take a look for a moment at what happens. Bondi Beach is not the best tourist place in the world. It's a very important place in the geography of Indigenous Sydney. when the waters rise, say in a glacial melt, what we call global warming, which is coming our way, waters rise. And when waters rise in Sydney, the water around Bondi Beach rises. And a lot of those houses will go underwater, and the water will fill up through the gully that goes down to Rose Bay. Yeah. And that will cut off Vaucluse. But it will also rise so far that the Cave of Secrets will disappear. There's a Cave of Secrets that the Indigenous people know belong around that mouth of what we know as the Parramatta River. And this is an important place. It's an important part of songlines where this happened. So how do we try to find a relationship to the deaths that occurred there? Because they're an inscription. And so we need to turn to some of Rudolf Steiner's understanding of what happens when we let go of the body. I'm saying it that way quite consciously. We let go, the physical body falls away, and we feel an empty space. We are conscious, and our body falls away when it dies. Now, on Sunday, there were children, there were rabbis, there were elderly people who had survived the Holocaust, who died, and each of them have lived a different part of their own life. And in the age of the consciousness soul, Rudolf Steiner asks us to practice 3 things to develop the consciousness soul. And the first one that he asks us to take credence of is that we need to develop human social understanding. Now, human social understanding in his terms here is we need to look at human beings with an individual evolution. These were not just a bunch of Jewish people celebrating Hanukkah. We can't collectivize them if we want to look at the spiritual side. There's a 10-year-old girl there who has a soul and etheric body that could live for another 70, 80 years. There's an old person who has the wisdom of a lived life of their culture here in Sydney and in the Holocaust within their etheric body and their soul. And what happens is when our body falls away, we become attached to that place. That place becomes a point of reference. So now we have in Bondi, not for the first time in history, but in recent days, 16 people who have at the same moment this place of consciousness of their death. And through their journey now into the spiritual worlds, that is a place of reference where they can draw their eye consciousness for their journey towards the midnight hour or the temple of our universal humanity. And their personal destinies will radiate from that place differently, even though they have a culture that's the same. But their lived experience also has affected their etheric body. And into that place, that hollow place, Rudolf Steiner says, we experience a tone, our personal tone. So we could, if we listened carefully, maybe hear a 16-toned composition resounding on Bondi Beach now for the next at least 30 years, if not longer. And the Indigenous people know this. They know that there's a responsibility to the people who have died there. And so yesterday, they took the responsibility and did something that I'm not sure they've done in recent times. Certainly I haven't heard of it, but they held a healing ritual, which became a reconciliation ritual around the corner here on Hyde Park yesterday afternoon, to a point where it wasn't just people coming to mourn and process things, but there was an imam there and a rabbi who both spoke and then hugged, under the gesture that in adversity, we will not be separated. We will rise into our humanity. And on Monday, Do you know what happened on Bondi Beach on Monday? The Jewish community turned up again and lit the second candle for Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, a big 5-foot menorah. And they all turned out again on Monday saying, we will not let fear darken our knowing of the light into the darkness. Now, Hanukkah isn't necessarily that originally, but it has fast become that. The Festival of Lights is that the light shines into the darkness. So it's become a spiritual festival in its modern expression, Festival of the Light, just like Christmas is and many other traditional festivals around the 21st and 24th of December. So they're maybe against what was intended by the people who decided to do what they did, to bring fear and more dissent. They are places of hope. The Islamic man who actually took a few bullets, an Islamic man who went and stopped the shooter, has gained a lot of positive seeing of people turning to protecting our humanity. And the indigenous people took that on. They didn't go to Bondi Beach, but they took it to Hyde Park and have in a way taken, they have not lost this knowledge that we are of the land, and therefore what happens on this land becomes part of our culture, part of our story. And so we can stand in a way. I'm not trying to diminish any of the tragedy or the horror or what should or shouldn't have happened. But as people who are trying to find a spiritual approach to things, can we hear that? That this is a place now where 16 new Christmas bells are ringing together. And as that space grows through the 3 days, the etheric bodies will bring up their memories of their life within them. And then that expands and becomes like a shining mirror for their whole journey through Karmaloka. We sort of tend to think, oh, after 3 days, the etheric body goes back into the general etheric. That's our sort of immediate explanation of the etheric body. But Rudolf Steiner actually says, no, it does. It goes into the general etheric world as a mirror and an imagination of our life. And that becomes a sheath. He says it's like a mother. We will come to the other side of the story when we come to the birth side of the story. But as we go into the spiritual world, it is like a person who's being born chooses a single woman to be born through into a womb and is held for a year. 10 months in the womb, 3 months after birth, where the finishing embryonic process takes place. Rudolf Steiner says in the spiritual world, the year is 30 years, the length of Karmaloka. And we have an embryonic being around us in those 30 years, which are our desires and our passions. Our desires and passions create a womb for us with the images of our etheric body visible for all to see, including ourselves, located at the place of our death. This is how we can listen to what happened on Sunday at Bondi Beach. There's many other deaths that take place in the city. I don't want to diminish any of that, but it might be a way for us to listen to what happens in the place where we live. Because one of the themes that Rudolf Steiner talks about in the evolution of a culture in the age of the consciousness soul is that the individuals need to play a part in holding that development of culture. And the way we contribute towards, he actually says, like a seed to a plant, the microcosm to the macrocosm, the individual to our culture, is that the individual needs to experience themselves the destiny of that culture. I'll just read you that because it's kind of an interesting little one-liner as he sometimes gives us. Is it in that book or this book? It's probably in this book. Yep. It is important that the member of a nation goes through everything the nation goes through. For us to contribute to the evolution of society, social forms, We need to go through everything that our nation goes through. Now, I hope we don't think our nation is the white settler nation, because our nation here in Sydney, in Australia, consists of more than just the European national gestures that have been brought, imposed, embraced, rejected, but also the ancient history. So have we as individuals who live in Australia gone through feeling marginalized? Have we felt colonized by something or someone? Have we felt what it means to be incarcerated? Have we felt what it means to experience whiteness and privilege? The systematic blindness that we have as a culture. Do we as white people, as people of European descent, mostly in this evening, I'm not saying we all have that, but do we have that? Do we experience that coming to us in our destiny? Can we enter into that? Now, I'm not saying that will have to happen to you personally, but at least in empathy, at least in compassion, in actual being able to sit with a person and say, I really experience what it means to be completely silenced and have no voice. Have you ever experienced that? No. Some yes, some no. And I'm not saying all things that have happened to the nations and the cultures here in Australia need to be fully experienced individually, but we can actually start to feel, I live in this country. What have the Indigenous people of this country had to go through that we don't know about? And can we live into that, touch into that, and to a certain extent, feel that being, I'm repeated in my own destiny by living here, but also then inviting, possibly allowing Indigenous people also to engage with who we are and what we can bring in both a positive and negative sense. I mean, have we experienced the negative aspects of what our privileged culture brings? This is an opening, an invitation to open us to experience ourselves through the evolution of the nation of Australia, in collaboration with, not just the Indigenous and the Europeans, but the Southeast Asians. They are South Americans, they are African refugees, there are many, many nations. We are a melting pot of world culture. We're probably one of the most multicultural countries in the world, even though not of equal standing with the systems. And to actually experience a little bit of that is part of the development of the consciousness soul. So being able to look at individual people, not as a Sudanese refugee or a Jewish person shot on the beach, but as individuals with an evolutionary biography, so that we can really begin to hear the full symphony of tones of our humanity on this country. They are tones that play constantly from decades, hundreds of years ago, still playing. Rudolf Steiner then talks about what happens to the physical body at death. We go, oh, it decomposes into the earth. That decomposition is a spiritualization of the material of the physical body that becomes spirit. And it takes up to 200 years, whether we buried or cremated, to actually allow the physical material to become spirit. On the other hand, it also becomes warmth. So where the body hits the ground or sleeps in the bed, a warmth unfolds. So around the tone, there's a mirror of etheric imagery, and there's a warmth body. We should be walking through a city of warmth, and not just because the sun's beating off the concrete. Yeah. Can we feel these things? Can we begin to feel these things as the place where we live? So that by way of introduction to how we can possibly find a way to listening to what happened in Bondi, along with our deep confusion, our fears, because the fears are there that will be veiling our own openness to feeling the Spirit. A lot of people at this sort of time sort of think, where was God? Why is this allowed? I don't believe anymore. I don't believe in a God that allows this kind of humanity. It's very easy to slip into that. But if we can raise ourselves into this other understanding, we may be able to contribute, because we will then have this experience in our own etheric body when we die, and it will become part of our tone. And then, just as a little parenthesis, how many places have you died? Is it the same tone every time? Or have we got our own symphony around the world? Are we drawn to places where we've died before and gone to pick up our tone and our destiny from that place? It becomes quite multiplicity, a lot of complexity and multiplicity in possibilities there of beauty, really, of how we can begin to partake in life and death if we can start to feel these things. Because if we have this understanding of the spiritual world, we are accessing something of this Christmas gift that I'm trying to bring tonight. So I've put here as a fourth point, what have we done? I've sort of addressed that a little bit, is each one of us lives in the world, and we participate in the world in at least three ways. But these are the three ways that I want to focus on tonight. We do things. We stand upright. Our standing upright as a child frees up our hands and our ability to move in gravity. So we find a place to gravitate ourselves, be upright, and orient ourselves in balance and move through the world where destiny takes us. We also then learn language. We learn to speak. And we then, out of that speaking, learn to put language together and create our own thoughts. These are the three gifts, or the three things that Rudolf Steiner speaks about in the first 3 years of childhood that we do. We learn to stand upright within the first year, language in the second year, and by the end of the third year, we're thinking, and then we can say, I am. And this is actually what makes us human. If you want to sort of have an idea that makes us different to a clever animal, these are three aspects that make us human. Being able to mine iron and build guns, or beautiful buildings, paint. We are the only creature who actually does that. And this sets us apart, that makes us our humanity. It gives us our humanity. And Steiner speaks about these things. Through life, that is how we participate. We participate by what we do, by what we say, imbued with our feelings and what we think. And each of these actually have a consequence. They have a consequence in our being, but they have a consequence in the world. We tend to think that our words and our thoughts and our feelings don't have as big a consequence as our deeds, but they do. So even if we sit at home and we say nothing and we're thinking thoughts, they have karma. So our hands have karma of an individual level. Our speaking have a karma of a national level on the folk spirits, the archangels. And our thinking actually has an impact on the archai, on the whole of our humanity. And these are the relationships we have before we are born. We are in the realm of spirit before we are born, in our thinking with the thinking of the angels and the feeling of the archangels and the willing of the archai. And as we come to earth, these journeys that we've been since our death, and we go out into the journey after death, and we meet, Steiner says, we have a religious pulling towards seeing the religion of the gods. And the religion of the gods is the universal human being. They have an idea, they have a dreaming. He actually calls it a dreaming in one of his lectures. a dreaming of what it means to be truly human, that they are encouragingly loving us towards. And when we die, we are drawn to that, but we can't fully touch it. We're not allowed to unite with it. We're allowed to draw its energy to us, and then the Christ being turns us back to the earth. And we start our journey towards the earth with all the fruits of our journey in the afterlife, and we start to build another destiny. And one of the things that we build, he actually describes this, he says, if you could see human beings incarnating, and this is another picture for Christmas time. Steiner talks about how at this time of the year, at the December equinox, is the time of birth. He says, in this time of the holy nights, all the beings who will be born in 2026 enter into the earth sphere. Whether they conceived on the 31st of December next year, doesn't matter, or on the 1st of January next year, they are all in the earth sphere, and they look like bells. I'm going to call them Christmas bells. The Christmas bells come out of the moon sphere into the earth sphere. So just as we have a tone when we die, we have human beings who have a bell shape in their energy, seeking new etheric bodies and new parents on the earth. And with them, they bring this great gift of their universal humanity. We've tanked up on these pictures of what it means to be human, in that we will be able to do, speak, and think. And as we then come into incarnation through an embryo and are born on the earth, those gifts are not just something that we do by instinct. It's not just an instinctual thing, like a horse will get up and run, or a bird will jump out of the nest and fly, hopefully. If it doesn't, it lands on the ground and probably dies. But it's an instinctual thing, whereas in human beings, we instinctually know nothing. We don't know how to eat. We hardly know how to breathe. We don't even know how to contain ourselves. We have to learn all these things. And so it is this great being that works with us as we, in our first 3 years, known as the Christ being. And we're going to come to the Christmas gift in a moment. But this is part of the Christmas gift, is that in these first 3 years, it is the universal human being, the Christ being. So the image of the universal human being was established by the Christ Jesus. And something was imprinted into the human being 2,000 years ago, that when we are in the first 3 years, allows us to draw these forces out of the hierarchies into our soul and body, so that we can claim our humanity in our standing upright, in our language, and in our thinking. And when we come to about the age of 3 and we can say I, Steiner says that they are around the child, we can see this Christ being as an aura. This universal human being of a child has this aura. And as we claim those qualities, eventually that aura sinks into the human being. And the Christ is in us from there, but is veiled through the intellect, veiled through all the things we've been speaking about, that we lose this connection, and rightfully so, because if that being, he says, if that being continued to work, we would burn up. No human being can contain the work of the Christ within the human body for longer than 3 years. Hence, the 3 years of Christ from the baptism to the crucifixion. Beyond 3 years, the body would burn and we would just ash. And so we are protected from that. But it is a seed form. It is a gift. It is a seed form which, through our life, we can slowly bring more and more to consciousness, into our, we could say, more human nature of our day-to-day personality, which fails quite a bit in what we do and say and think. Fail's not a good word, but are wanting quite a bit in often how we speak to each other or what we think about each other. And we can, the journey is then to bring forth from the seed form the Christ being more and more to fulfillment in ourselves. And so the Christmas gift is that on the 24th of December, we have in the anthroposophical understanding, maybe a separation or a fulfillment of the Western Church and the Eastern Church. The Eastern churches tend to celebrate the 6th of January as Christmas, the Western Church the 25th of December. And they throw the two stories together. But we have the possibility of saying, on the 24th of December, we have a being who comes to earth, who has been since the beginning of the human being's journey in the physical body, which we call Adam and Eve, or the middle of Lemuria, if you wanted in anthroposophical terms. A part of our being was kept in the sun, which had all of these qualities of the perfect human being before we took on this destiny of the earthly body. And this being brought that back to the earth, untouched by the influences of Lucifer and Ahriman. We see here, I don't know if you can see this picture on the screen. Can you see this picture on the screen? Yeah. So this picture here is of the Christ being with Lucifer and Ahriman in various ways. And Steiner talks about this as a representation of this universal human being. But the Jesus being of the Luke Gospel didn't have any of these influences around him. He was this perfectly naive, pure part of humanity that was put on the earth and then matured through the work of the Zarathustrian being, and eventually took the Christ being in to fulfill that destiny of these human gestures of being able to allow the human soul of the hands, the language, and the thinking to be vessels for the true I am of humanity, the universal human being. So that which we wanted to be in the midnight hour, which came into us as children, which was then veiled, was given to us as a humanity, as every human being. So every person who held a gun or a shot on Sunday had this power in them. It's not a religious thing. It's a human thing. That deed was for every single human being who is born. But we can lose that connection through idealism and materialism and fear. We actually can lose that connection. And part of our journey together is to remind each other that we can bring forth these qualities. And as a journey of, Rudolf Steiner talks about as a journey of initiation, we can fulfill this Christmas gift. This is the real Christmas gift, is that a part of our humanity that had been withheld from us was given again. Biblically, we could say the tree of life was given back to us. Yeah? Given back to us, but in a form where we have to now fulfill that within ourselves. That's the journey of the spirituality, we could say, of unfolding that experience of Paul that says, not I, but the Christ within me. How do we allow this second Adam, the spiritual soul, the soma pneumaticon of Paul, to unfold and become available and present to us in our humanity? And that sort of brings me to the last part of what I would like to say here, is this wisdom lives in the light. I've spoken about it before, and there are a few things that quite a bit that could be said about it, but it's a meditation that Rudolf Steiner gives on the 1st of May in 1913 in London. You can look up the lecture, and then he develops that meditation on the 5th of May in Paris and on the 10th of June in Stockholm. Nothing in Germany, but in other countries. On this, I mean, he speaks about it in Germany and other places, but in these few weeks from each other, he speaks about this meditation, and it's a transformation. It's a meditation, he says, that is not based in physical perception. No one can see wisdom lives in the light. You can't measure it. You can't touch it. You can't smell it. You can't hear it with these senses. You've got to develop senses to be able to perceive it. But he says, when we hold that thought, wisdom lives in the light, we take a part of the forces that we use for our thinking and can feel them. This is called thinking without the brain. We start to develop brain-free thinking. A force is removed from the brain and moves above our head into an etheric space above our head and starts to develop, at first, a dark space where we just experience ourselves different from the physical body. Then he adds a second layer, which is wisdom radiates in the light. I'm not going to write it all up. And that is where we withhold the power of speaking. We hold it back a bit, and that moves into that space as a warm candlelight. A warm candlelight. And then a third version, a third layer of the sentence comes. World wisdom radiates in the light. And he says that's where we use the forces in the heart and the blood that make us stand upright, and we hold that back from our uprightness, and that moves into that space of the etheric realm and the warm light, and it begins to illuminate the spiritual world for us. And it develops the chakras at the same time. Now, that we can work with as a meditation, but as you can see, it's the human faculties of thought, of language, and uprightness that we are calling on. We are calling on to develop a way of perceiving and knowing the Spirit. Simple. Really simple. A couple of little tricks that you need to know. Be calm while you're doing it. Don't get impatient. And sit still. Do not move your body for at least 15 minutes. That's his advice on this meditation. I sit on my hands because otherwise I'll fidget. But it's quite interesting what happens if you don't move the physical body. You can feel these forces on the thinking being released. So not my thinking and my speaking and my willing, but the forces that lie beneath them, the forces that have been imbued by the Christ, become available for the beginning of a higher perception. He then, in the other lectures, starts to add feelings and will impulses into the meditations. So he says, for example, we can add the feeling of, I want to live in the light that makes wisdom radiant. And you can add the little impulse that says, I will walk in radiant wisdom through evolution. So we start to unite our thinking and feeling and willing with this new being. But then a third step is brought in the Stockholm lecture, which is important for tonight, because it has to do with the transformation of the bodily forces into faculties. So in the first one, we could say wisdom lives streaming in the light. He actually says in that lecture, wisdom lives streaming in the light. And as we feel the bodily forces becoming part of this etheric place where we can think, it allows the forces of our willing allow for us to develop moral thoughts. And then as we develop, we release the faculties of speech. He says we can change that that second verse to wisdom radiates warmly in the light. And as that faculty of unused speech or withheld speech lifts up into our etheric form of perception, we develop an organ where the Logos can speak, the Christ being, the Word. We actually develop a place where that which is within us from childhood can now actually inspire our moral imaginations and our loving speech towards people. And with the third one, we then see a transformation of the will forces into a body, an embodiment for the truth. So incredible, far-reaching meditation, simple little meditation. Wisdom lives in the light, wisdom radiates in the light, wisdom of the world radiates in the light, developing the unfolding of the Christ forces within our thinking, feeling, and willing, and in our capacity to speak, do, and think. So I thought I would bring that as part of tonight, because it seems to be a progression, a challenge by Rudolf Steiner to work on finding ways, and this is a constructive way for him, to find ways to allow that which sunk into us at the age of 3 and became veiled through our own volition, through our own work, to begin to work into our thinking, into our speaking, and into our doing as the loving force of the transformation of the human, the ideal human being, to allow the ideal human being to be more present in us more fully as we access these forces. That's it. You could ask a question, yes?
On your approach to Aboriginal spirituality. Sorry. I was fascinated by your approach to the Aboriginal spirituality. Was that part of your Steiner work, or did you do work on that separately?
Yes.
I'd just like to know a little bit about it, because you're fascinating. Like, I've been coming along here for years and I've never even heard about anybody talk about Aboriginal spirituality. Could you what? Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
I just know where you got that from.
Rudolf Steiner does speak about the Australian Aboriginal totemism.
Really?
And he speaks about a little bit about the kangaroo and forms here, but it's very small little snippets that you have to really hunt for.
But you have seemed to embrace it.
Well, I've had the good luck and the wonderful graciousness of being able to work amongst Indigenous people in Australia.
Wow.
Specifically more when I lived in Adelaide. I became very connected to the elder of the Paramount tribe, Richard Hunter, where the Christian Community Church was. Right. And we sat down and worked together in earth healing, business ritually. And he taught me a lot. And then...
Because Aboriginals are normally very suspicious of white people wanting to know about their own ways. I'm curious how you got in there.
Yeah, I'd like to unpack that one a little bit. They're only suspicious of people who are worthy of being suspicious of.
Okay.
If you start to show the patience and the acumen and I suppose the interest, the real warm interest in their individuality and their culture, they will let you in. But it's a schooling like any other schooling. You kind of get let into grade 1. Right. Possibly even kindergarten. And once you've sort of shown that you've understood that 1 and 1 is 2, then you get into sort of maybe geometry and algebra, and eventually you'll do maths and calculus and that sort of stuff. And Aboriginal initiation and knowledge is a little bit like that. What we get mostly are the kindergarten stories. Yeah. The dreaming stories. But when you actually sit down and start talking about that, you start to realize or get told and be taught that this dreaming story from this people, say in the Adelaide Hills, and this dreaming story of the people up at Wilpena Pound, and this dreaming story of the people up at Uluru are part of a bigger story. Yeah. And you start to learn the connections between the bigger stories. And slowly but surely you get let in, often very laconically and often with one-liners, and you sort of have to make the connection yourself. But yeah, I've had the good grace and the good blessings to be led and taught by Indigenous people. And here in Sydney, there are some people I still want to meet. And there are other people, other elders, aunties who, I work with, and we talk. We talk.
That's really brilliant,
and you slowly learn. And I don't in any way presume to know how to represent it. I say what I know, and I'm sure it's could be seen as the wrong thing to do and the wrong way of saying things, but I speak of it as I've come to know it.
But it appears from your talk that you've really incorporated a lot of Aboriginal spirituality into your own Steiner research, which is
absolutely
brilliant.
the indigenous, the Australian Aboriginal indigenous knowledge, first wisdoms, align very strongly with Steiner's conception of the spiritual world and human nature.
Wow.
So, for example, they differentiate between the Mulla world, the Yawis, and the Dawis, which is the physical body, the soul body, and the spiritual body.
Wow.
And they have a rainbow serpent who is the 7 creator spirits, and they have they've got descriptions of creation through beings that come in totem stories, but for example, a simple example would be when the earth was being formed and the rainbow serpent was carving out the gorges and the mountains, there was earth that was too heavy. And so the rainbow serpent threw that up into the sky and it became the moon, Balu. And Steiner talks about how the moon and the earth separate. So they have a conception that is actually spiritual, scientific in their own way. And I think it is worth us to sit and listen to those stories rather than seeing it as naive or unknowing.
Yeah, but you've incorporated into your talk today, which I find absolutely brilliant.
I like to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Because it's funny about I worked in Aboriginal communities as well, all over New South Wales, and they don't really relate to people. It's almost like they've got the big third eye, that they can see what your motives are. And unless you go in to talk to Kooris with pure motives, they'll just shut you down. So that's what I want to talk to.
Look, there's a lot of trauma, as I'm saying. There's a lot of suffering that they've suffered at the hand of our culture. And so they're rightfully suspicious as well.
Absolutely. But it would be good if maybe I'm going to come to all your talks now. This is the first one I've come to in years, because I saw an old friend of mine here. But it's funny that I think that the Aboriginal spirituality can contribute a lot more to the thoughts of Rudolf Steiner.
Absolutely.
Brilliantly.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why I thought, wow, you've conceptualized really deep stuff here. Not just the Steiner experience, but other things that can be reflected back into the Steiner experience.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, anybody else want to talk? Go and ask him. He's a great lecturer, this dude, so you may as well take advantage of him.
Yeah.
I guess I came at it from sort of 2 angles at once. And one was something that cropped up in the in John Pater's meditation just immediately beforehand, but which I realise I live with every day, and that is from the point of view of world karma, and where are we going, and are we likely to see a quote-unquote civilization-ending event sequence? And I think you will know what I mean by that if you...
We can guess, John.
But the other was from the second-hand experience that I've had, but rather a lot of it, with watching near-death experiences, and seeing how indeed we do leave our bodies. And of course, it is very much along the lines that you just described. I mean, it broadly substantiates what you're saying, what Steiner is saying, and it's nice and it's interesting to come at it from a somewhat different angle. And of course, if we do have the dreaded civilization-ending event sequence, then the karmic consequences and the spiritual and energetic consequences of that will be absolutely overwhelming.
Yeah, thank you.
I've got a question, but I'm also, before I give that, I just was thinking, given that you've brought Bondi into it, which was wonderful to do, it's wonderful, but it was good to have it in the space. Just thinking it's still in the first 3 days. So
absolutely.
it's quite palpable, including for the gunman who died as well. It's also in his 3-day
Absolutely.
tapestry. So yeah, it's very powerful to have that in the talk tonight. But my question is about the wisdom lives in the light meditation and a moral seal. Like, I know in the anthroposophical work, there's always there would be some kind of moral, if you can't hear what I'm saying, you're frowning at me, M-O-R-A-L, moral.
Speak up.
Meaning, can't go so far in wisdom that the moral work isn't keeping up. Like, that safety clause is somewhere within the anthroposophical work.
It is.
Yeah, because I was thinking, like, with what you were talking about with Aboriginal people allowing people in, that's a way of working with a moral seal, I think, and I imagine it must be implicit in the wisdom lives in the light, or is it explicit in how Steiner brings it to? Because I'm just thinking, surely you can't just work on building up a vessel for the Christ, and the Christ will visit regardless. Or
no, thank you.
Where's the moral aspect?
There is an explicit understanding of that, which I can try and explain. Is that when the language faculty is transformed into a perception of the Christ being, and we've developed a capacity out of the thought forces and the bodily forces of will that are used for movement into being able to develop moral imaginations. It is the closeness of the Christ that allows us to I'm going to use the word freedom here, but there's a sense of just as we can develop an idea and it can go in that direction of too far into my own interpretation of things. If the Christ is present, and both of those things, the truth, the moral imagination, and the Christ as the word, have to be accepted in freedom. The Christ never will force himself upon us. We have to turn to the Christ force in freedom to illuminate and give motivation to Christ becomes the force of motivation in the will towards the imagination. So just having a moral imagination isn't yet the ability to do it in love and compassion. And if we can allow that Christ force, we don't have to. This is the danger, I suppose, of esoteric development. We don't have to let the Christ in, but the Christ being will come to, and that's explicitly an intention in the meditation and the development to allow us to approach the truth, the moral imagination, and the Christ's love in the word to act together in us. That marriage, it's sort of like so it is explicitly there. Thank you.
This is really a beginner's question, I think. What is left of the spiritual path, higher spiritual path, to those who are non-Christian and don't call on Christ, or what do they call that would be equivalent? The theistic religion, but also for the Buddhist. What do they call that is equivalent? Is there such an equivalence?
Of Christ?
Of wanting to how you said it, of Christ being to help us or lend us more of what we need to do. Something like that, I grasp. Whatever it was that you meant.
Yeah.
What is this?
What is that vow?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. So how does that work? Yeah, I mean, that's one of the big questions. I mean, in history, that's been defined in many different ways, that there's, no redemption outside of baptism kind of thing. I mean, the church has moved away from that, but it has been in the medieval times, it was a big thing that, if you're not baptized, you're not going to meet God. And there's a whole theory in that. The Jesuits were pretty strong on developing that thought. However, we're looking here at our humanity and our collaboration as human beings. So Steiner talks very clearly about how different destinies have different tasks in the spiritual world. So a 10-year-old girl who is shot by a bullet 2 days ago will have a very different destiny in the spiritual world than a 87-year-old woman, or different people. And we unfold forces within ourselves that can give light to the path for people. So when we die, because the Christ being has entered, whether we like it or not, whether we acknowledge it or not, this universal humanity in our thinking, our speaking, and our doing, our uprightness, is a capacity within every human being. We also then acknowledge that it's up to every human being to begin to unfold that. And so I hear what your question is. What happens if a person hasn't done that? Will other forces come to their aid? And so Steiner talks about this death moment, that when we die, what we have thought and what we speak and what we have done steps out of us. So when we sleep at night, the hierarchies of angels that work with these things in us, the angels, the archangels, and the archai. So when we sleep at night, our thinking is in the bosom of the angels. And when we are sleeping, our language, the things that we have spoken, are in the bosom of the archangels. And the things that we do every day are in the bosom of the archai. And that's for every human being. You don't have to be Christian to be that. That's part of the universal gesture. And that shines into us at night. We have a shining into us at nighttime, and we have music that resonates within us through the hierarchies within our etheric body. And when we die, that becomes visible to our spirit. And that work, that if we haven't been able to connect to the Christ, the grace of the hierarchies will also still lead us to these things. So it's obviously better if we can find the Christ, and then those who have been left behind, we can offer thoughts of the Christ being, and we can offer thoughts of the spiritual path to those who have deceased. This is the work with the ancestors. I mean, again, the indigenous people know how to turn to the ancestors, not only to turn to them for guidance, but to offer them knowledge of what we've learned as human wisdom. So these hierarchies don't necessarily know what it means to tell a lie. So they're curious. They're curious about what it feels like to tell a lie. And they don't like it, but they're curious about knowing what it feels like. And so there is this system. There is a light path system that will lead us through the planets and the hierarchies to the doorway in the sun. And that is also then where we will possibly be, and some cultures will meet Christ under a different name. So Steiner is very clear, the Christ isn't the only name for this being. Different cultures in the particular creation story that I was referring to tonight, the sun being is known as the goddess Yi, W-H-I. And she is the guide of humanity. She speaks to humanity. She's the counselor. She brings counsel and guides human beings. So in that culture, the sun god is a feminine entity, as it is in anthroposophy. There's the holy wisdom, Holy Sophia of the Sun Lodge, who works with the Christ being. So it's an immensely complex system. It's not a straightforward road of this is I die, and this is the path that takes me to the midnight hour, and I come back. This complexity of seeing people as an individually evolving being comes into play when we die, and other forces of guidance will guide us past lifetimes where we may have been Christian, or prepare us to take on another incarnation where we will meet the Christ being more fully. So it's not only that we have to have this connection to the Christ to make it work. There is still grace and guidance if we haven't quite made it through to that point. That's possibly a simple answer.
Now, following on what you've just said, and also partly an answer to Mishka, the thing that enabled me to understand what Christ had done was studying Buddhism and reading the Bodhisattva vow, in which the Bodhisattva vows to experience even an eon in hell, if thereby even one fellow sentient being can be brought to salvation. And the penny dropped. What was the ultimate expression, the purest expression of the Bodhisattva vow? The deed of Christ.
Yeah.
I've struggled with that question, but for me, I'm just saying as a personal answer, for our modern society, is he brought the capacity to take an interest in the other. And when there's no interest in the other person, there's conflict.
Yeah.
So whenever there's conflict, you can say the person's not really interested. Because to take a true interest in the other person, you have to become selfless. But to become selfless, you need to be really strong to sacrifice that egotism.
Yeah.
That's my interpretation.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I really like that picture. I've spoken about that before here when Rudolf Steiner talks about the transformation of the Holy Grail story, when Lohengrin becomes the Grail keeper. Lohengrin is, Steiner says, is the great initiate who brings about the impulse of urbanization. And the Grail impulse, or the search for the Holy Grail, is transformed into an urban setting. And the place of and this will bring us back to Bondi and to how we relate to that, is the first gateway to the Holy Grail is interest now, and tolerance and compassion. These are the 7 stages of the feeling. I mean, we talk about the 7 stages of the will, but we can also talk about 7 stages of the transformation of feeling through tolerance and interest and compassion towards our neighbor. So, can we tolerate an Islamic man who took out a gun and shot people? Can we be interested in his story? And in that way maybe transform something. And if we do that in our thinking and our feeling, will he experience that when he dies? That someone was interested in his story, and that could be a light on his path, that someone was interested in his tragedy. And then we are in the Holy Grail, one of the versions. Yeah. So I'm going to finish with one more picture, which I meant to bring into the lecture but forgot, but remembered while we were talking, is part of the imagination of this Christmas gift is that the angels and earlier humanity knew this being, knew the Nathan soul, knew the Christ being, because he was in the Son. He was the Son Spirit, and the Nathan soul was in the soul of Sophia, in the Mother Lodge, in the Son. And they didn't need to look for the Christ. And human beings on the earth could turn to the sun year and find this great sun being. But then those beings left the sun. And while, Christmas comes, we celebrate God is with us again, or with us. What did the angels on the sun feel? It was a death. It was a loss. They lost consciousness of the Christ being, and they don't know where to find him. So where do the angels turn to find Christ? to the human heart. So the human being who is wrestling, and this is a Steiner picture, he said the human being who is wrestling to find this Christ being in our true humanity and bring it to birth are like Christ stars shining to the angels. And through the Christ stars of the human hearts, the angels find Christ again. May that be a thought for our Christmas this year. Thank you very much.
Well, I will close. Should I close again with the verse?
Yeah, that'd be lovely. Thank you.
We have as well a bowl there for contributions for Jude, for the ones that are in the room, please. And that pays for either Jude or for the upkeep of the house. Deep down in the human soul lives the Son of the Spirit, certain of victory. Powers of the true heart and mind sense it. In the egotism of our human winter, night of our inner life, sense the new shoot of hope in our heart. Sun, Spirit's victory is what we behold in blessed Christmas light. Symbol of life most sublime in world winter's deepest night. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.